Hello everyone, this is Matthew Tillack, Business Development Manager with iPlanGroup, and I'm here with a very special guest, Mark Fixler with Jag Enterprises. We're just going to give everyone a few more minutes to hop on the webinar, just for those last few stragglers, and then we'll get going. In the meantime, Mark, how many deals do you have going now, would you say? How many loans do you have in the pipeline right now?
Currently, we have over 200 transactions that we're involved in.
Wow. And those are active loans?
They're active loans.
Nice. Okay, good. Yeah, we've got a pretty good audience tonight, and I'm very excited to have Mark here because, you know, Mark works in the lending business, so he makes a lot of transactions happen. You know, he's the funder, or the guy that actually, you know, brings the funds to the table so investors like you and I can go out and do deals. So again, we'll just give the rest of the people just a minute or two here, and then we'll get started with the broadcast. Okay, thanks folks for being on the call again tonight. My name is Matthew Tillack with iPlanGroup, and like I mentioned, we have a special guest here, Mark Fixler, who's going to be teaching us, you know, how to do deals with private funding. And this really fits in well with self-directed IRAs, because one thing I've noticed over the last year or two is these types of transactions have really picked up, where we've got a lot of self-directed IRA clients that are becoming the lender or the funder on a deal. And you know, there's so much IRA money out there right now, and it's sitting idle. This can be a really great way to supercharge your account, and also it's a great way to invest into real estate without actually owning it, without actually doing that work. You know, someone else is doing all the rehabs and the estimates and the due diligence. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Mark is a local investor, and we really have started to build a really great education relationship, because, you know, he's been involved in over 700 transactions. And so he brings a wealth of knowledge to this webinar. And what I want to really emphasize is, you know, notes and mortgages or lending can really happen inside of a self-directed IRA pretty easily. You know, just like if you were to do a note and a mortgage and loan with personal funds or business funds, you can do that same transaction with an IRA account. Your IRA is simply listed as the lender and the lien holder on the note and the mortgage. So keep that in mind when you're doing a deal, that this is a viable investment transaction inside of a self-directed IRA. And then, of course, your profits are either tax-free or tax-deferred. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mark. And Mark's going to go through a really great presentation that he put together for us. And Mark, thanks for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, everyone. As Matt had mentioned, our company, Jag Enterprises, engages in supplying capital to people who want to buy real estate for profit. They want to buy it, fix it up, perhaps resell it, or turn it into rental property. And there are many pitfalls that happens when you own real estate. And so we came up with this several years ago to invest in these real estate transactions and still make a wonderful return without being involved in terms of the day-to-day operations of real estate. So what we typically do, and if you look at the first slide, our mission statement is to supply capital to professional real estate entrepreneurs and to meet their growing demands for private loans. So what we do is this. We analyze many transactions in the Northeast Ohio area, and all of our transactions would require a first position in a mortgage. We don't do any residential or consumer transactions whatsoever. So this is just intended for profit, which allows us to make a profit, allows perhaps our co-funders a profit, and most importantly, the borrower in this case, a profit. All of these situations must be a win-win situation. So basically, we intend to continue on in Northeast Ohio. That's our marketplace, and there's a lot of opportunities here. Private mortgages have been increasingly important in the real estate finance venue because banks have tightened up quite a bit. If you remember the transactions that happened in 2007, 8, and 9 with the financial crisis, banks basically froze up. Everyone's aware of the foreclosures that were happening then. Banks just decided to dump properties. But the reality here is that foreclosures have been going for as long as real estate has been out there to own. It's nothing new. It may be new in terms of the amount of foreclosures at once that happened in 2008 and 9, but it's not a new venue. What ends up happening is this. Typically, when lenders approached folks that, let's just say for the sake of this conversation, had a home that was valued at $100,000, and let's just say we have two people, one Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones. Mr. Smith owed the bank $75,000. Mr. Jones owed the bank $75,000. Typically, what would happen is, believe it or not, the bank would call the one that owed only $25,000 and say, okay, you know, you're behind in your payments. Let's see if we can work something out, because they're owed $75,000. On the other hand, the one that's owed $25,000, believe it or not, those are the ones that, you know what, if you can't make your payment, we're going to have to foreclose because they've gotten most of their money out. What happened in 2009, what typically would happen with banks, that went out the window. They were foreclosing on anyone. Didn't matter how much equity you had in the property. And that freed up this opportunity to purchase real estate at a very favorable price. As a matter of fact, there are several billions of dollars worth of private mortgages, which is what we do. They're made on an annual basis. Since 2007, that's when this business really picked up. And it's a great opportunity for those who are interested in being involved with real estate, the security of real estate, without actually owning it. Private mortgages rely on a different approach in many cases. Private mortgages have a more appropriate risk to reward. So let me give you an example. Typically, when people go and they purchase mortgages, or they buy a home rather, and they get a mortgage from a bank, the bank has a certain criteria of what they're going to do in terms of that loan to value ratio. Typically, if someone puts as little as 5% down, a home would be financed. In our case, in an investment vehicle, we generally look at a 62% loan to value. So in other words, if one of our clients were looking to purchase a home and to flip or to resell, if you will, to ask for a loan of $62,000, we would have to feel very confident that that home would be worth $100,000 when it was complete. So our ratio of protection of the asset is much greater than that of a bank. In many cases, private lenders can provide capital to real estate investors in distressed properties. Today, obviously, there's an incredible window of opportunity in order to do this. People have asked all the time, are foreclosures drying up? No. There's a number of foreclosures that are all over the country. Specifically in Northeast Ohio, there's just an abundance of opportunities to invest in real estate for profit. If you look at this, as private mortgage lenders, we do this because it's a great opportunity to lend on real estate and have a secured asset. It's not the stock market, whereas you're buying stock, you're betting obviously that the stock is going to go up. In our case, we're doing a private mortgage. We're having a first position mortgage put on that property, and that's our security. These loans generally will have a high rate of return. Typically, you can expect to receive as one of our, whether it's our co-funder or whether it's someone else. In other words, if we partner with someone who wants to put capital, whether it's their IRA or whatever the situation is, typically you will find that they can earn an 11% rate of return. So that 11%, if you're in an IRA, is basically either tax-free or tax-deferred. It's a fabulous return, and it's secured by real estate in a first position.
That brings up a great point, Mark, and I'd like to ask you a question here. So, a company like yours, can you tell the audience a little bit about what you guys bring to the table as far as evaluating the deal, taking it, making sure it's a good investment and it's a win-win for everyone?
Sure.
Can you cover that a little bit?
Absolutely. Great question. Typically, when we start the evaluation process, first of all, we look at the individual company that is asking us for a loan. But most importantly, we'll look at the property. So we'll have an address, and then we'll have a criteria sheet of what they're going to do to the property to fix it up, including, we have here in Northeast Ohio, for those of you that aren't from here, point of sale inspections. Point of sale means that a city is going to have the right to inspect that property and to make certain that certain repairs are done. It's for actually protection for the end user. So we will evaluate the property, we'll evaluate the point of sale inspection report, and we'll also evaluate what our borrower intends to do with the property in terms of repairs. In order for us to do a transaction, we must feel comfortable that we're going to be in that 60 to 62% loan to value, or LTV, at the end of the day. We also look at the individuals who own the company to make sure that they're somewhat credit worthy. I'm not going to sit here and say to you that every single one has 800 credit scores, because they don't. But we certainly do have some minimum criteria to make certain that this will be a viable transaction. Our job is this: to find these transactions, to go through the evaluation process, and to ensure a successful transaction. We typically will charge our borrowers 15%, and then we share that to our co-funders, if you will, at 11% rate of return. So, and that all happens after the evaluation process. Our loans typically will go no longer than 12 months, but on the average, they'll close in about 8 months. And that's, again, part of our process.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Typically, the loans are fully secured with two sources of repayment. Obviously, we're going to have a first mortgage on the property. And second of all, we want to make certain that the person or the company that is borrowing this money has the ability to pay the monthly payments.
Mark, can you, for the new investors on the call, can you explain what the mortgage and the note do and what they are?
Yes. First of all, in Ohio, we're allowed to use what's called a cognovit note. And a cognovit note simply means that you don't have to go through the process of going through the courts to get a judgment. This is not a personal transaction or a consumer, it's for business. So therefore, we have that ability that in the event that a property we weren't receiving the interest payment on, that we could get a judgment. The mortgage is out there, it's in public record, so everyone knows that XYZ will have a mortgage on that property. And so it's a very secured situation. All of our companies that borrow money have to also guarantee the note personally as well. So when we're looking at a 62% loan to value, or ARV, after repair value, considering that they sign a cognovit note and a mortgage, we feel very strongly that this is a very safe rate of return for our investors.
Okay, so basically that note is the promise to pay to your company, and then the mortgage is your lien. So if you have to take a property back, that's how you do it, right?
That is correct, and we're within the law to be able to do that. Absolutely.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about how your company has full recourse as a lender, and kind of how that backs up you and your investors as well.
Yes, so our loans carry a full recourse. What that means is this: if we have XYZ company, an LLC, corporate, doesn't really matter, corporation, our borrowers are personally responsible in guaranteeing this note. So if we had a situation where we had a $50,000 loan out there, and for whatever reason we had to take the property back, and we only, for instance, were going to receive $45,000, the borrower is still on the hook for the remaining balance of $5,000, plus interest, legal costs, so on and so forth. Quite frankly, out of the 700 transactions or more that we've done, we've never really had a situation like that. If we do our due diligence and do it properly, and we find that these truly are 60 to 62% loan to values, that our funding partners and ourselves are in a very good position. We want to make certain that our borrowers, and I've said this before and you'll hear me say this again, we want to make certain that our borrowers are in a very good position, that they're going to make money. Part of my evaluation, one of the last steps is that I want to make certain that our borrowers make money to the tune of at least $15,000 per transaction. If I don't feel that after all real estate costs, commissions, taxes, cost of money, if they're not going to net out $15,000 or somewhere very close to that, we will pass on the transaction, because we feel that their time is worth more than a few $1,000s. We want to make sure that they're going to make a decent amount of money to ensure that they're going to stay in the deal. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yeah, it does. So it sounds like one of the ways you guys stay successful is also making sure that your borrowers stay successful. So I can see that if you've done 700 transactions, that's going to give your borrower a lot of, education, I guess you could say, and a lot of what would be the word? I mean, a lot of due diligence from somebody who knows what they're doing.
Absolutely, and our borrowers continue to come back to us on these transactions because they understand our philosophy.
Got it.
It's not about us just making money or our co-funders. It's all about all three of us. It must be a win-win-win situation for everyone involved.
Okay, excellent.
So the originating process that goes along with this happens in many different ways. We have very strong relationships in Northeast Ohio with real estate investors, residential real estate brokers, and mortgage brokers and bankers. Many times we get referrals from banks that simply cannot do a transaction because it doesn't meet their criteria. It may be a customer of theirs, and so perhaps we'd like to get involved in a private transaction and become the investor in that property. One of the things I pride myself on is to make certain that good deals turn into great deals, and we have reoccurring opportunities with our borrowers on a regular basis. One of the processes that we'll go through when determining whether or not we will do a transaction is the following. First of all, location, and everyone's heard real estate is location, location, location. So we want to make certain that the location that we're looking at has comparable sales. What that means is we can demonstrate a history of a neighborhood that will show that the home will be worth, let's just say, $100,000 for this particular transaction. Number two, we want a full evaluation of the condition of the property. It's not like a situation where you are in an auction. And so let me explain the difference. We have the opportunity to go to the properties, evaluate them, look at the condition. When you're buying something from an auction or a sheriff sale, if you will, you may not have that opportunity. We don't fund situations like that. We need to know for our investment dollars exactly what we're going to get in that property. We also look at local market conditions. So not only the comparable sales that are there, but how's the employment rate? How's the crime rate? We want to check out situations in that neighborhood to ensure that this is going to be a successful transaction. Zoning, permit regulations, and local demographics also play an important role in this. So for instance, if we look at a neighborhood that is somewhat rural, is it zoned to have a freeway next to it all of a sudden? You know, we want to look at these kinds of situations to make certain that, again, this will be a profitable transaction for everyone involved. In the origination process, many people, as myself, will examine the financial conditions of its borrowers. So their ability to meet their operational needs of the property and the experience in real estate ownership, restoration, and management. Property value, as the company believes that in the event of a default and its acquisition of the title to the property, the company will generally be able to hold, restore, and if necessary, manage the property until it's sold. I read that verbatim for a reason. I cannot stress enough the importance of getting involved with people with experience. This isn't such an easy situation that I would recommend folks all of a sudden, Mr. and Mrs. Smith calls one of you up and says, look, you know, do you have any money you can lend me? I want to go buy a house. Leave it to the experts. Whether you use us as a conduit or whether you use someone else, the folks that have the experience will ensure that this is a successful transaction. I'm not sitting here, and I don't want to come across that this is so easy, just go out, take a shot, invest your own money, and see what happens. It's not so simple. The loan approvals are based on the review that I had mentioned. So I'm just going to repeat this again. A site visit to the property. So for those of you who want to get involved with this and you don't have the time to do it, someone like myself or other companies would be an ideal situation to evaluate this transaction and the property valuation. A review of the borrower's projected results. We always will look at, as I mentioned, how much is the property going to cost? What will the cost be to make the property saleable? And at the end of it, what will the property be worth, and will it be a fruitful transaction? Lastly, we're going to look at the financial condition of the principals. We want to make certain that they have a history, for the most part, of being able to pay their bills.
So Mark, let's stay on this slide for a second. I've got a couple of questions about this one. So, I mean, obviously a site visit is great because you're going to be able to get eyes on the property and do a valuation. Now, when you do the review of the borrower's projected results, what are you looking for there as a private funder yourself? Do you look for a contractor's bid? Do you need something on paper? And then also, how do you obtain the, an estimate of your ARV or after repair value on that? Can you cover that a little bit from the lender's standpoint?
Sure. So let's take the actual cost of doing the repairs first. What we typically like to do is have the borrower or the potential borrower send us a sheet of what they're going to do and how much the costs will be. Many times that will include a contractor's estimate that they have received. Now, if the community that the home is located in has a point of sale inspection report, I compare the two. I want to see if the repairs that the contractor is agreeing to do coincide with what the city is asking them to do. Because in many cases, I have seen that the two the two may not be the same. And what that means is it's going to cost the borrower more money. So therefore, I have to make certain that they're going to be able to cover the costs of that. As far as their credit history is concerned, we ask all of our borrowers to pull their most recent credit report, and we want to make certain that they haven't been into too much trouble in recent times. I'm not going to give you an exact credit score of what we look for, but it certainly doesn't have to be near 800 to get a loan with us.
Do you look for other factors, maybe like collections or bankruptcies? What makes a good borrower to you?
Sure, I definitely look at bankruptcies and to see if they're paying their bills. One of the things that we come across once in a while, but it happens quite a bit in terms of consistency, is this. Some folks think that because they're putting a property in an LLC and they have IRS issues, that the IRS can't touch the LLC. Well, that's not accurate. If you own that LLC and you have an IRS lien on you, then the IRS has a first position on that LLC. Therefore, we could not get a first mortgage on that property.
Oh, that's a very important point. Very, very good point.
So these are the kinds of things that myself and our legal staff work on for every transaction to ensure that we know exactly what we're getting into.
Excellent.
In many cases, or at least in our case, we look for areas that are in the middle upper class areas. And what I mean by that is not about the classes. What I mean by that is comparable sales. I like to look at frequency of homes being sold and bought. If I'm in an area that's an area that there are no comparable sales, I get asked this all the time. You know, I can buy this house for $5,000, put $7,000 into it. I think I can sell it for 40 grand, 50 grand. Well, if I can't find a house that's sold anywhere near there for 40 or 50 grand, I can't do that transaction because it doesn't make sense. And we want to make certain that the areas are in a relatively safe area, and we want to make certain that the comparable sales certainly show favorable to what we're trying to accomplish. When we look at this qualification of the properties, in many cases, any lender wants to make sure that the borrower is going to succeed. And in order to ensure that that transaction is a win-win, we're going to only lend in situations where the property is well constructed, it's in a desirable area, and a combination of the purchase price, necessary rehab, and upgrade costs are below 62% of after repaired value. And Matt, I can't stress this enough to everyone who's listening out here. We've got to make certain that we stay within that criteria, because in the event that you have to take a property back, you want to be in a position of preservation of that capital. You can get that money out because you're priced at 62% of that value fixed up.
That's a very important point. That's how you're protecting your money that you put in, whether it's personal or IRA money, because you've got some built-in equity into this house, basically.
That's correct.
Now, how do you come up with the number of 62? Like, I've seen some people say 60% ARV, and other people say 65. What made you go with 62?
So 62 is an average. 60 is the ideal optimum level for me, but sometimes we go as high as 63, 64 maybe in some cases. So I'm using 62 as an average. There are many people who do what I do, and sometimes they'll go up to 75% loan to value. But there's catches to that. They charge a lot more money to the borrowers. They perhaps charge a lot more in terms of transaction fees up front. And the reality here is they're not so interested in a win-win situation. It's, well, if you really want this loan, then we're going to go ahead and loan it to you, but here's what the cost is going to be.
They're going to hit you with fees.
Absolutely. I don't do that. And there are many people like me who don't do that as well. As I mentioned before, we want to make sure that our borrowers make a good profit on each transaction they're involved with.
That's good to know, because in a lot of these cases, you're using a private funder to make this transaction happen. So not only do you have to protect yourself, you have to protect them as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to skip this slide. It's kind of redundant, okay, but I will mention one thing. We make certain that the borrowers are United States citizens. Because of the paperwork that we're using in Ohio, such as the Cognovit note that I mentioned before, we want to make sure that not only are they a United States citizen, but we also want to make sure that in our case that they're an Ohio resident. Otherwise, you know, we have to protect our assets, and we don't want to have to go all over the country to have that happen.
Good point.
Certainly in other countries.
Now, one thing that caught my eye on this slide, and you may have covered it, but I think it's important, or if we didn't cover it, it's the fact that you as the lender require that borrower to be a legal business entity, like an LLC or a trust, for instance. So you're not really loaning to a person. It's more of a business-to-business loan. Can you explain that a little bit and tell us why that is? And
sure, absolutely. This is a business-to-business transaction, and all of our borrowers must have either an LLC or a subchapter S or an Inc. or a trust or something like that. What ends up happening here is that because we don't do consumer transactions, we're not going to lend to an individual that is professing to do a house, buy a house rather, fix it up, and then resell it, and then they end up living in it. That's not what our intention is. Our intention is to purchase a house, fix it up, and resell it. Those are the only transactions that we engage in. So it's very important to understand that just a company is going to be buying these homes, not an individual.
Now, I imagine with different, like the Dodd-Frank Act, for instance, and things of that nature, I imagine it could be quite difficult to do a personal loan. Is that also one of the reasons you do it as a business-to-business? Does it free you up as a lender in any way?
Well, yeah. I mean, Dodd-Frank certainly has changed that rule. Before Dodd-Frank, there are many situations that you could have done a loan to an individual, still for profit. But because of the Dodd-Frank rule, I think you're limited to 3 on an annual basis. And so it just gets much more complex. And so for our protection, we insist that we're lending to a company, not an individual.
So these are not consumer loans. I think it's a very important point. These are business loans for the purpose of, rehabbing and flipping or renting a home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is absolutely business to business. So we have a situation where our legal team, we've been doing this basically since 2007, and we're constantly upgrading documents to make certain that any change in laws that are applicable. And we also want to make certain that our system is protecting the assets as best as possible. So in many cases, we may do a transaction today, and maybe in a week or two we may have to tweak our paperwork to change any rules that may have changed in that period of time.
So I think this is a really important point for self-directed IRA investors, folks, as well, because we get a lot of note transactions that come through, and sometimes a client will ask, well, do you have a note, or where should I get one? Should I go to OfficeMax, for instance? And one thing we usually mention to our clients is, hey, it's always a good idea to seek legal counsel, especially legal counsel that is state specific, and that way you've got the most up-to-date paperwork, and it's been reviewed by an attorney, and that's just going to make you more successful as an investor. So even though you're using IRA funds, it can be a really good idea to seek legal counsel if you're going to be doing a note and a mortgage like we're talking about, and becoming a private funder to other investors. So very important point. Thanks for bringing that up, Mike.
Whether or not you use us or another lender, and I mean that sincerely, we will always insist on receiving a first mortgage and a note for the entire loan amount, along with provisions for accelerated interest in the case of default, with projections such as the prohibition against subordinate financing, prohibition against the guarantors residing in the property, and a clause assigning rents to the lender in the event of a default. These are the kinds of things you want to ask someone if you're thinking about doing this with someone, that are you going to follow this criteria? Because if the answer is no, then perhaps you want to talk to someone else to be, instead of my company, Jag Enterprises, you want to use someone else. You want to make certain that these things are met. If they're not, I would suggest strongly talk to someone else.
Excellent. So are these going to be located in your note? Is that your agreement that these restrictions would be placed?
So it's not just in the note, but in our case, we use an actual financing letter that outlines these exact provisions that our borrower will be signing. So there's no question that they will be aware of. They're not going to reside in the property. They're not going to be allowed to put a second mortgage on the property, and so on and so forth.
Excellent. So again, you're protecting your investment. you're protecting your capital.
Absolutely.
Excellent. That's really good advice.
Right. And then on the personal side, we do require a guarantee from an authorized officer. It'll be a personal guarantee, and if there's more than one member to that LLC, obviously we'll need a resolution from all the members of the LLC authorizing a certain person to be able to engage in this transaction. We feel that this is an exceptional risk to reward. If you're going to get 11% annual return, annual percentage rate, if you will, you're assuming that the credit risk of the professional real estate investor, more importantly, loans are secured by the real estate. We know we're going to be somewhere around that 62%. And you want to make certain that all the transactions are vetted in the way that I've outlined earlier. Again, that's the property, that's the rehab costs, the point of sale, and of course looking at the entity and the individuals. You want to make certain that you have an alignment of interest with professional real estate investors. Can't stress that enough. The market, with the market implosion of the subprime loan market, we all know what happened in 2007, 8, and 9. The opportunity to take advantage of this really is now, and it's a great opportunity to invest in real estate without owning it, so you're not dealing with constant situations of either tenants or contractors themselves. I'd be more than happy to take your questions at this point. I think there's a great opportunity to answer them, so please, I think this is going to be a
Yeah. So folks, what we're going to do here is Mark is a wealth of knowledge. Like I said, he's done over 700 transactions, all real estate rehabs and flips. So if you want to raise your hand, you can type in some questions into the chat box, and Mark is happy to answer those. Does everyone have access to the chat box? Okay, we're getting some questions coming in here. Okay, folks, I think what I'm going to try to do here is unmute people if you have some questions. Okay, Bill, I've got Bill on the line. Bill, did you have a question that you wanted to ask Mark?
I did. I think I know the answer to it, but I want to make sure he didn't mention why it's a 12-month term.
Good question. We look for 12-month terms because if our investor, our borrower, have purchased the property properly, there should be ample time to buy it, fix it up, and then sell it. We don't want to get into a situation where it's going to take so long that their cost of money is going to go up dramatically, and it won't be a successful transaction for them to be able to sell that house. So we look for 12 months as an ideal situation to give ample time to get in and resell the property.
So does that eliminate anyone who wants to buy this property as a rental property?
No. Rental properties, that's a different situation, and we do rental programs ourselves. So as long as we know up front what the situation is, we can accommodate. The difference is, though, we need to make certain on a rental program that the property taxes are paid when due, because we don't want to get into a situation where we find out 3 years down the road that there's a tax lien that's been filed on the property. because those taxes weren't paid. So in a rental situation, we want to monitor to make certain that those real estate taxes are paid on a timely basis.
So I think that brings up. Go ahead. Oh, Bill, were you mentioning when somebody can use that as a second exit strategy? So like if the house doesn't sell on the open market as a rehab, maybe they refinance and pay that note off and then hold it? Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just wondering, if this is only for a flip program or if there is some leeway that for those people who want to purchase the property and use it as rental.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Mark.
Yes, and that opportunity does present itself, or as it presents itself, yes, we have done that in the past.
Okay, excellent. So let's go on to the next question here. Charles, did you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Well, I had a couple. You didn't mention any investment level. Is there an investment level required to be a part of this program?
Typically, we don't do loans smaller than $25,000. And in many cases, we'll partner with people, depending on the level that they have. So in other words, maybe you and I would split a transaction just for the sake of this conversation. But typically, that minimum amount would be $25,000.
Okay. And we've talked about IRAs. Is this an IRA only kind of program, or is just any kind of money work?
Any kind of money would work.
Okay. Can it be a combination of the two?
It's very difficult to merge a person's IRA with their own personal funds because we want to make certain that the tax benefit of your IRA is not going to be compromised. So I would have to look at that on an individual basis to make certain and work with the folks here at iPlan to make certain that that's not going to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, so what he's referring to is, you might want to have an attorney get involved and look at that transaction and evaluate it, because anytime you partner with yourself and you're a disqualified person to your IRA, you have to watch the prohibited transaction rules. So it just introduces a little bit of extra legwork that you're going to have to do to evaluate that deal. But yeah, but you can partner. It is a possibility.
So right, is the $25,000 or $35,000 range something that's doable?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say, something like that, you'd want to just reach out to Mark and Jag and have that discussion, offline. I think.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll leave his number up here for you, and if you have any further questions, you're welcome to reach out to him.
All right.
So I'm going to kind of get through the rest of these questions here. Charles Thomas, did you have a question that you wanted to present to Mark? Charles, on you. Yeah.
Type that.
Hi there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wondered if the interest rate is the same whether you're using your own personal funds or money from an IRA.
Yes, it would still be the 11% rate as far as we're concerned. Other companies may differ, but in our case, it is the same rate of return.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so we only got time for a few more questions here. Mark, how many more would you like to answer for the night?
Let's do a few more, please.
A few more? Okay. So we've got a question here from Donald. Donald, are you on the line with us? Would you like to ask a question to Mark?
Yes, I'm trying to understand. If I understand right, you are getting 15% and then giving us 11% as investors. And if you repossess the house and there's more than the 15% gained, do we split that in any way, or we cap 11%?
No, in that case, we would have a conversation. So the conversation would go like this. So we have a borrower who isn't paying. We have a house. We feel it's worth X. And at that point, we would discuss whether we want to sell that house or I can get another investor to perhaps take it over. But let's assume that you wanted to sell the home. the excess proceeds from that house would be split between you and me. So your rate of return actually would be greater than 11% in the event of a default.
Excellent. Okay, so let's see, we've got a question here from Gail. Gail, are you on the line?
No.
Guess it wasn't on to Gail. George says.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do one or two more questions. We've got a question here from George. George, are you with us?
Hello, George.
Hi, George. You can ask the question or type it into the chat box, whichever you prefer. All right, let's move on here to, let's see, Gwen had a question. Gwen, are you on the line with us? Hello, Gwen. How about Greg? Greg, you're unmuted. Would you like to ask a question? This one? Mm-hmm. All right, next question here. Marty. Marty, would you like to ask a question?
Marty, are you there?
All right, we're going to try one more, and then we're going to sign off here for the night. Susan, you are now unmuted. Would you like to ask a question to Mark? All right. Well, we answered a couple questions there. We got some really good content. We're also going to replay this webinar, folks. So if you know anyone that missed it, or if you'd like to watch it again, we'll replay this next week, and then we'll also put it up on our YouTube page as well. So that way you can, review those slides, play and stop at your leisure. But again, thanks, Mark, for being on the call with us tonight. As self-directed investors, we're always looking for alternatives to invest our money and really have good education as far as what you can do and how to do it. So thanks again for coming on and talking about notes and mortgages and how to be a private lender. And I hope you have a good night.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I want to thank iPlan, and I just want to make sure everyone understands this is for educational purposes. Please call me anytime just to learn about this industry and to further your investment opportunities. But again, this is just for education. It's been a real pleasure, and have a good evening.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good night.